Onto a different story now. Let's look at productivity in the workplace during the 2023 Rugby World Cup. I am joined now by Hugo Pienaar, who is the Director of Employment Law Practice at Cliff Durker Hofmeyer Law Firm. Good to have you on the program this afternoon. Now, with the Rugby World Cup 2023 in full swing, what strategies could you say can employers implement to indeed maintain productivity and employee engagement during the tournament, especially when matches are scheduled on working days here?
Yes, so may I start off by just saying that this is quite a common event worldwide when you have international sports events such as this. In fact, when we look at stats, it shows that the best performing or least number of culprits per country would be that in France, probably because of their 35-hour work week. But of course, that may change after last night's results. The worst performer in terms of that would be the Chinese workers, especially around their attendance of basketball matches, etc. So that being said, the second one is that, and that's a caveat, is I think my advice may change from time to time how well we do in this World Cup event. But be that as it may, I think the starting point is that employers need to embrace the event. We mustn't have a sort of a punitive approach. And I think you want a sort of approach where you, as an employer of choice, want to tell your employees, we need to make this work. It's in your interest that the company continues to perform well. Companies generally struggle at times like this. But let's, for instance, work out a different works roster for employees to attend on those days, in particular when you have higher rates of absenteeism on a Monday, since most of our matches will be played on a Sunday. So that's one way of doing it. Of course, employers may send a reminder to the employees just to alert them to their duty to report to work. We know that generally speaking, there's an abuse of medical certificates during times like this, but of course, the case law is clear on this. In fact, the Woolworths case has recently decided that constitutes a dismissible offence if you submit a false medical certificate. And then, of course, employers would as always reconsider their position in terms of the requirements of medical certificates as prescribed by the Health Professionals Council, and there are a set of rules for that purpose. And then, of course, just generally to remind employees, this is about the country, but mostly about the company for the moment, because if we don't survive, then there's no future for you. And then just lastly, it's also a matter of safety. You know, when an employee comes to work and he or she's been overindulged, then the employee would be unfit to perform work because of safety regulations. The last point, I think it depends on the type of industry. Some are more flexible, and then it's easier to accommodate. When you work in a fixed shift environment, as in a mining or factory environment, it's more difficult to manage. But there, my sense is, let's work out a roster system with our employees to ensure productivity and ensure that everybody enjoys the World Cup.
But Hugo, some may say to employers that, hey, cut the workers some slack. South Africa is a rugby-loving nation, so give them a bit of a break here. But could you elaborate on the importance of communication and also flexibility in managing potential absenteeism as well as distractions among employees during major sporting events like the World Cup?
Yeah, as I've said, I think employers should embrace the event, but we must also know that not only do employers work under or live under difficult circumstances, many employers are also marginalized and struggle for various reasons, whether it's load shedding or otherwise. So we need to protect businesses to ensure its sustainability and, more in particular, job security. It's a 2-month event, roughly, and if you have certain production targets to meet and you have a proper workflow, you can't afford to take your foot off the pedal. So yes, employers should endeavor to accommodate, should have an embracing approach, but ultimately it's about the safety of workers and the security of the company. And that will always be the primary importance. And the two don't have to be at the extent of the other. As I've said, employers shouldn't have a punitive approach, not at all. Have the embracing approach, accommodate employees where possible, but ultimately the operational needs of the company and its survival will always take priority.
Now, Hugo,
what they should do is communicate well and ensure that the rules are clear and employees are aware of.
Right.
Maybe just highlight the policies that they have in place and ensure compliance.
Now, Hugo, in your experience, how can employers indeed balance the need to support employee well-being, including enjoying events like the Rugby World Cup, while still achieving organizational goals? You've already started alluding to some of these points.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is a lesson learned by some companies during the 2010 World Cup, the Soccer World Cup. And there were high rates of absenteeism. And what some employers did, they said, we're now going to become a caring employer. So what we're going to do, we're going to visit you at home to ensure that you're okay and take you some flowers or chocolates, depending on the employee's preference. But that's said tongue in the cheek. Of course, a balancing act means that employers should not have a witch hunt. But at the same time, as in every relationship, it's a twofold relationship. The employee has signed a contract of employment. There's a fiduciary duty. You can't afford as an employee to overindulge. And the fact that you enjoy the World Cup and the successes that may come along with that does not mean that you should do so at the expense of your employment. And it's really trying to strike a fair balance, as you've pointed out. Interesting, my wife was on the tarmac in Italy when they won the World Cup, I think in 1982. And the chaos that broke out at the airport and on the tarmac, and everywhere you would see airport vehicles racing, and flights were delayed for hours. And I remember the hype we had when we won our first World Cup, Rugby World Cup that is, and the unity it brought for our country, and the need for that, and especially to unite our diverse workplace and nation. And of course that is important, but the one need not be at the expense of the other.
Now, Hugo, the research on, for instance, cricket and productivity suggests that watching sports can improve focus and morale. How can employers then leverage this insight during major sporting events to benefit the workplace?
Well, I think that they can, the starting point is make the employees part of the potential issues that may arise. Use that as an opportunity. Have competitions within the company. Consider how you're going to structure meetings and more important meetings, whether you can move some of that, just by way of a practical example. And as I've said, in a flexible working environment, which you'll probably find more in IT or otherwise, it's easier to accommodate. It's more difficult to accommodate where you deal with the shift system and where you have production outputs that's required on a daily and sometimes hourly basis. Then it's much more of a different challenge. But again, if you would sit with your workforce and say, well, let's see who's keen to watch which games. You can even have some sort of draw, a lucky draw, and say, on these days, because employers operate always on this basis that there's some sort of absenteeism. So have more of a planned absenteeism. Say to the employees, let's have a lucky draw, and whoever is the lucky person here or a group of people will be exempted and have an extra day leave on certain identified days. And you can do that because you have the roster. You can potentially see which games are more serious than others and more important for the rugby enthusiast than others. And of course, sometimes it depends on your work profile, whether they're more keen rugby supporters as to others. So all of that, the employer must simply be creative about, have an absolute open mind, and share the enthusiasm with its workforce, but make them part of the solution, bearing in mind that there is a potential problem that they can easily identify, as I've indicated earlier.
Hugo, let me thank you for your time. That's Hugo Pienaar on his perspectives on strategies that employers can indeed implement to maintain productivity and employee engagement during the Rugby World Cup tournament, especially when matches are scheduled on working days. I do hope that employers are watching this interview quite closely. Let's take a